Shabbat Shalom, everybody. It's good to see so many faces we haven't seen in a while. I'm glad to be with you. I'm glad that you guys are here with us. And above all, that God has come to meet with us here this morning. So last week our weekly Parsha, right? We started the book of Bamidbar, right? Book of Numbers in the wilderness. And we were talking about this thought, this idea that's in the wilderness, Bamidbar. This book is what we see as this beginning of maturing of this relationship between a bride and groom, right? Between Israel and the Father. And we were talking about how the plagues in Egypt were kind of this courtship time where he's like, I'm going to show you how strong I am, and I'm going to do these things for you. And when he takes her out, it's like he's rescued her from this tyrant king and swept her out into this wilderness where now she's a free woman, so to speak. And he proposes and says, would you be my bride? Would you marry me? And she says, yes, of course, all that you've spoken we will do. And we have just all of this excitement happening, and it's fun and interesting. Not everything was fun, I admit, right? The whole golden calf thing, and there's a few bumps in the road. But everything was kind of just exciting and just had this elevated sense of emotion and what's going to happen next. And then we come to Numbers. We come to Bamidbar. And now it's, okay, let's see how many people are there. And this is all your duties. This is what here's the Levites, and here's our 3 clans. This is what you're going to do, and this is what you're going to do. This is what you're going to do. And we see this transition from everything is just really exciting and woo to, okay, now we're going to do the dishes, right? And so we see kind of Bamidbar is this time where some of the kinks are being worked out, so to speak, right? Where as they're walking through this relationship with the Lord, that something comes up and he says, oh, no, we're going to do this instead, right? One famous time, right? It's when there's so many points where somebody does something, and then they come to Moses and they're like, hey, what are you going to do with this guy? And he's like, I don't know. Give me a minute, right? And he goes back and he's like, let me go ask the Lord. And so, Numbers 14, 15, right? Gathering sticks on Shabbat, and now we're going to stone him. And he's like, okay, well now to keep this from happening, you're going to have seed and attach that, right? Like, so there's just this kind of like working out, and so we just see this process of growing up, and things are becoming more routine, right? There's it's more we kind of settle into a rhythm, and this is kind of what we would say, like we've come home we're back from the honeymoon, right? The honeymoon is over. Let me say it that way. There you go. The honeymoon is over, and now we're just going about our life. And even with that, there are times where God has said, hey, at this time and this place, we're going to do something together, right? It is still going to be exciting. It is still going to be times of excitement and exuberance and specific things. And so we just have one, right? This is the season for Shavuot, right? This is where we're looking back and we're saying how exciting this was, right? Mount Sinai, that God came down and spoke to his people, and they saw the voices and the torches, and they said, whatever you say, we're going to do it. And it was this amazing time. And then we come to Acts chapter 2, and Yeshua has ascended and said, wait for the promise of the Father so you can be my witnesses in Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria and the othermost parts of the earth. And so then we see that happen, right? Where God comes and pours out his Spirit. No longer is it this thing that's out there and we're watching, but now we see that, like Judy said, this is a personal thing that God actually fills people. He's always filled some people with the Spirit, but now it's this widespread, like, hey, we have access now as believers to God and His very Spirit. And so we talked about last week about coming of age in some ways, right? About being mature and hanging on to the things that are important for that. And I want to talk this week a little bit about being rooted, about being planted. Let's go to Psalm 1. And just as a reminder, so after my message, we'll dismiss, and then we'll have a Q&A time for, we're talking about membership and that sort of thing. We're going to have some of the leaders come up and talk a little bit, and we'll open up for any questions. And so just as a reminder for that. All right, so Psalm 1. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the way of sinners. This, by the way, blessed, this word blessed, however you want to say it, is this word ashrei, right? It's ashrei. It's like happy, joyful, content. It's like, it's not just that somebody has bestowed a blessing on you. It's that you're joyful, you're happy, you are content with your life. Right? This is something that you have God is saying that we should be focused on that. We should think about it. We should meditate on it. Meditation isn't clearing your mind of everything and not thinking. Meditation should be thinking on the Word of God and having that be our focus. Just that was meditation before meditation was a thing. We're just going to say that. So it goes on, though. He says that he is like a tree planted by streams of water that yields its fruit in season, its leaf does not wither. In all that he does, he prospers. And the thing that stuck out to me was this idea of being planted, right? That the tree that's by these streams or by these rivers, some translation might say rivers of water, that the tree is there. It's planted, right? It's not sitting there. This might sound kind of weird unless you've seen the Lord of the Rings movies, because trees don't move unless you're in the Lord of the Rings. You're planted. The tree is planted, and it's not saying, okay, well, I'm thirsty and I'm going to take this drink, and then, you know what? That is a beautiful hill over there. And now I'm planted here, right? How ridiculous. And then, I'm thirsty. I'm going to come back to the water. Right, but it's planted. Right, that's what planted means. Is this is where I am, right? Like I can't move because my roots are here, right? And so I'm planted here. He says, so he's planted by streams of water and yielding its fruit in season. His leaf doesn't wither, and all that he does, he prospers. And then there's this contrast that's drawn. The wicked are not so, but are like chaff that the wind drives away. They're like chaff. We just planted, by we I mean my wife, because I can't lift more than 15 pounds for the next month. But my kids planted a few trees in our yard this last week. I think it was this week. I'm losing track of time. It's this week. And one of them was an oak. And, yeah? Okay. You looked up, and I didn't know if I was wrong. It looks like an oak. So one of them is an oak, and that oak's only about this big around right now. Yesterday, my daughter and I were driving around, and we passed by this way that we don't often go, and we passed by another oak. And that oak was, if you start at the edge of this keyboard, come over, this was how big that oak was. Okay? And it was gnarly. It was a pretty awesome oak. It was just this thick, strong tree that had been there for, who knows, 50, 100 years. And there's a difference between our oak and that one, right? When the wind blows, like she said at our house, the wind is like almost always blowing. When it blows at our house, our oak does this right now. This other oak does this, right? The branch is kind of, but that oak's strong, right? That oak is firm, it's secure, it's planted, its roots go very deep. So it's not going to get knocked over. And he says that oak, that's what those who are planted by these streams of water, meditating on the word of the Lord, are like. And it says the wicked are not so, but they're like chaff that as the wind drives away, and they won't stand in judgment, and that sinners won't stand in the congregation of the righteous. And it's interesting that there's this connection between meditating on the word of the Lord, being planted by streams of water, and standing in the congregation of the righteous, right? This kahal, which is actually where we get our name for this congregation. Not to read anything into that. But looking at this, I was reminded of something else. Let's go to Matthew 13. So this is going to be familiar to probably most all of us. And this is Yeshua talking to a multitude that's gathered around him, and this is going to be a parable that's familiar. This is the parable of the sower, and we're gonna look at this a little bit. Verse 3, and he, Yeshua, the many things in parables, saying, a sower went out to sow. And as he sowed, some seeds fell along the path, and the birds came and devoured them, and other seeds fell on rocky ground, where they did not have much soil. And immediately they sprang up, since they had no depth of soil. But when the sun scorched, and since they had no root, they were withered away. Other seeds fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them. Other seeds fell on good soil and produced grain, some 100-fold, some 60, and some 30. He who has ears, let him hear. And jump down with me to verse 18. Hear then, and when he's saying hear, he's not saying let the sonic waves into your ear canal and register some kind of meaning. He's saying understand what I'm saying here, right? Understand then, hear then, the parable of the sower. When anyone hears the words of the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one, in Mark it actually says Satan, comes and snatches away what has been sown in his heart. This sown along the path. And as for what was sown on rocky ground, this is the one who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy, yet has no root in himself, but endures for a while. When tribulation or persecution arises on account of the word, immediately he falls away. As for what was sown among thorns, this is the one who hears the word, but the cares of the world and the deceitfulness of riches choke the word, and it proves unfruitful. As for what was sown on good soil, this is the one who hears the word and understands it. He indeed bears fruit and yields, in one case 100-fold, in another 60, and another 30. And it's the thing that stuck out to me about this was the only one that bore fruit was the one that not only had good soil, but that had a good root system, right? That had been established, whose roots went down to draw the nutrients out of the soil and water, and to have this health, the one that bore fruit had to also be planted. And so it was some of the things that are interesting to me. So I've grown up here. I've been here most of my life. I had 12, 13 years that I was kind of in the Seattle area and kind of moving around or whatever. But I'm from here, and when my parents are still in the house that I was quote unquote born in, even though I was born in the hospital. But anyway, so they're in that house, and across the street for most of my childhood was nothing but fields. For as far as I could see, from our house to the mountains, it was just like fields of crops. And and things are maybe a little different here now than they were at this time when Yeshua is speaking. But I've never seen whether it's be a farmer or a gardener, go out and just kind of toss seeds, right? How many of you know that that's not really a stellar way to get get a return? And so it's hard for me to imagine that this is literally Yeshua saying, well, this sower, this farmer is doesn't know anything, right? That at some point parables break down. And we all know that in order for something to bear fruit, for a seed to sprout and to grow, that there's intentionality behind that. And so some of the things that stick out to me is that these fruitful plants, A, like I said, they had good deep roots, and B, that they were planted in a particular spot by the farmer, right? Somewhere that the farmer knows that this seed is going to get what it needs, that it's going to have good soil, it's not too rocky, it doesn't have too much clay, it's going to accept water, it's not compacted, there's nutrients there. And so the farmer knows where it's best to plant the seed. And it's not that he plants the seed where it's going to be most protected from the weather. Right? It's not. He doesn't plant it where it's going to get it's going to just be shady here. It's going to be super easy, and we'll just water every so often, right? I mean, if you look around, like somehow Boise is called the city of trees, and after living in the extreme Pacific Northwest, right, I can tell you that there are hardly any trees in the valley, comparatively speaking, and definitely not on farmland. Right? When you go to farmland, like it's hard to find any shade anywhere. And so the farmer's job isn't necessarily to protect the seed from the elements, it's to put it where it's going to grow the best. And obviously we don't want certain storms and all that kind of stuff, but it goes through the heat of the summer. It goes through the winds of the fall and the cold and in the fall in the winter. And especially when we come back, if we take this conversation back to this tree in Psalm 1, right? That tree isn't protected from every storm that comes in, but because it's planted by water, because its roots go down deep, it's able to endure the heat and the wind and the rain and the cold, and is able to grow strong. And actually, that tree needs those things. Right? The one who planted that tree knows that it needs some things that are difficult. It needs the heat, and it needs the cold, and it needs this contraction and expansion and these seasons of differences, right? Sometimes those differences could be difficult. Sometimes they could be a little easier. Sometimes they can be refreshing. But the fact is that it was planted. And so we have a little garden, and we, a couple years ago, again by we, I mean my wife and kids, planted some rhubarb. And this rhubarb plant, this is the second year, and it's got big, long, I don't know what you call it, like, fronds. I just thought that was a name. I didn't think it was, I am fronds. Okay, so it has these fronds and leaves and all this, like, it is beautiful. It is just beautiful. And my wife realizes, we just have these, we have these other raspberries that are going to, like, take over, and I want this to grow more and be able to, we're going to make this the raspberry box, and we're going to put the rhubarb over here, and that'll be our rhubarb box. And so before my surgery, she's like, okay, I really need you to help me do this. And so we went out there and we worked for longer than I want to admit, and we got this thing up and transplanted, and we thought that we'd done a good job. There were a couple little roots, and there was one chunk of root that wasn't little that broke, unfortunately. But we thought we'd done a good job, and then we looked out a few days later and a few weeks later, and the thing isn't doing so well. It's still there, and it's coming back, right? It is coming back, but which is awesome. We love rhubarb, and we're looking forward to that. but my thought is that we're probably going to be able to eat off of that next year, right? We should have been able to eat it off of it this year, but we had to move it, right? We had to uproot that plant and put it into another location. And it survived, and it looks like it's coming back. It's going to be strong, and probably next year we'll be able to eat off of it. But what would happen if we did that again next summer or spring or like every other year? Am I going to expect to get much produce off of that rhubarb? No, probably not, right? And so if we do this enough, if we pick it up and we move it enough, that we're going to never see any fruit off of that. I thought my chapter disappeared. I went from one chapter to 2 chapters later. All right, so we're going to bring this home in here. So let's go to Ephesians chapter 3. We're talking about being rooted and being planted, and we're talking about this in 2 ways. One is of being planted in the Word, right, and being established in the Word. And the other, we're going to see a little bit here, is we're also talking about being planted in a place, right, and with people. So Ephesians 3, and we'll start in verse 16. And you know, with Rabbi Shaul, right, with the Apostle Paul, Rabbi Shaul, it's like almost any time, unless you're going to read like a half a chapter, it's really hard to like get the beginning of this thought because it just goes on. Okay, so we're going to jump in a little bit at the beginning, in the middle here, but it says Ephesians 3:16 says that according to the riches of His glory, right, of Messiah, or excuse me, of God our Father. It says according to the riches of His glory, He may grant you to be strengthened with power through His Spirit in your inner being, so that Messiah may dwell in your hearts through faith, that you, being rooted and grounded in love, may have strength to comprehend with all the saints what is the breadth and length and height and depth, and to know the love of Messiah that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled with all the fullness of God. That sounds awesome. That's just amazing. We're going to read that again. That according to the riches of His glory, He may grant you to be strengthened with power through His Spirit in your inner being, so that Messiah may dwell in your hearts through faith, that you, being rooted and grounded in love, may have strength to comprehend with all the saints what is the breadth and length and height and depth, and to know the love of Messiah that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled with all the fullness of God. It's so interesting to me that he's talking about, riches of God's glory and be strengthened with power, and that Messiah is dwelling in your hearts through faith. And then he says all of this is, quite literally, when we look at the text, it's circled around being rooted and grounded in love. All right, this is what he says, that you being rooted and grounded in love, and out of that rootedness and groundedness, you can have strength to comprehend. And this goes right along back to Psalm 1, right? That tree that's planted by the rivers of water is not like our little, 1 or 2 inch sapling. Right? That tree that's rooted and grounded, that's planted by that river of water is like that huge oak, right? Because it has strength. And so he says that being rooted and grounded, that then you may have the strength to comprehend with all the saints what is the breadth and length and height and depth, to know the love of Messiah that surpasses knowledge, and that you may be filled with all the fullness of God. I'm gonna say something that you probably were guessing I was going to say. Maybe you weren't, but you probably were guessing, and it may seem a little bit controversial, and you may be totally cool with it. I have no idea. But when I look in Psalm 1, and it talks about being in the assembly, in the congregation, right? It says that you're being part of the congregation of righteousness. And it talks about this tree who's been planted can be part of that. And here, Shaul says that if you're rooted and grounded in love, that then you have the strength to comprehend with all the saints the love of God and the riches of his glory, and to receive the strength of his Spirit in our inner being. It seems to me that there's a little bit of this thread of being planted somewhere with people and not constantly uprooting and going somewhere else, and I like it over here, and oh, that looks really nice over there, so I'm going to come over and now I'm planted here, and now I'm going to get up. But that there's this idea of consistency and of God putting us in a place for a time and for a season and for his purposes, and that if we uproot ourselves, that we miss out on the purposes of God and on the blessing of God and on the fullness of him. And it's not just in our life, but what God would have used in our life to bless somebody else has now come short. Now, I'm not saying that you should never move ever in your life or anything like that. Because there are times that God says, hey, it's time to get up and go over here. I'm looking around. I think most everybody in this room, there's only a few that I know of who haven't physically moved in the last X years. I'm one of them. We moved in 2012, right? We came back here. But I think that there's a difference between looking and saying, oh, this looks really good, and I want to go over here, and this is nice over here, and God saying, it's time. You've grown to the place that I need you here, so I'm going to bring you up and put you over here. When we before we started going to Beit Tikva, which is a congregation we were a part of in Washington, there was another church that I was going to, and I don't know how long I was there, for a number of years, and somewhere between 5 and 7 years. I don't remember how long. And I remember I was at a bus stop one day, and God speaks to me very plainly and says, when you get back, I was in Costa Rica at a bus stop. And so God says, when you get back to the States, I want you to change churches. And my first thought was, yes, thank you so much. Because it wasn't that the place where I was at was bad. It was home. Judy and I were just talking about this, that we had so many good relationships there. And I was actually talking to the Halls on Thursday night about that when I went to this place, this was home. Like God transplanted my heart. I mean, I still have friends and family here that whenever I go to my parents' congregation, it's great to see people that you've seen and you've known for 20, 30, 40 years. But God put us there. And then I just had this conviction that, well, when it comes time to move, God will tell me. And I had a lot of friends who left that congregation after some time. There was changes that happened, and people just started leaving. And the question was always, when are you going to move? When are you going to leave? Why are you still there? And my response was, well, God told me to come, and he never said to leave. And I might not like it right now, but this is what his plan was. And so then he tells me in that bus stop, when you get back, I want you to change churches. I was like, whoa, thank you, God. And I had no idea, but that was the beginning of our journey here, right? That the congregation that God had for us was Beit Tikva with our beloved man, we've made so many just deep friendships and relationships there. And it was such a healthy place. And when it came time to move from there to here, again, God spoke and said, basically it's time to go to Idaho. And we were able to, Judy put the word out and people started praying for us. And our rabbi came on and said, you know that God speaks to you through dreams and visions, primarily by his word first, right? By his word, through his spirit, by dreams and vision, through circumstances, through other people, right? Different ways. And so he's like, just wait on the Lord and pray, and he'll make it plain. And he did. And the next morning, actually, is when God spoke to me and said, it's time to go. We had friends in the congregation who that morning, when God was speaking to me, like half an hour, 45 minutes earlier, they were in prayer, and his wife and her husband and their son were praying like separately and together, and they all were like, oh man, it's time for Mark and Judy to go to Idaho. Right? And this is just one example when they send us off, all this kind of stuff. But my point is, it doesn't have to look exactly like that every time. Like that's not my point. But my point is that God, when he puts us somewhere, he knows what he's doing. And sometimes it's difficult. Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it was really hard for us to leave Washington, specifically Beit Tikva, because our hearts have been knit together with so many people. And we still have really good friends. Like we love going back there and visiting and spending the night and whatever, right? But it wasn't like that at first, right? At first it wasn't like, oh, hey, all of you are just my newly found, long-lost friends. This happens over a period of time. And when God puts us somewhere, he knows what we need. And it's not always the most comfortable thing, but I would say that it is always the best thing for us. And so last week we were talking about maturity, and this is one of those areas where that kind of trite saying of bloom where you're planted comes into play, where this is actually a godly thing. And sometimes God will move us on, and it can be a very good thing. But when he's not moving us on, he wants us to be planted somewhere and to be rooted. And I can tell you, the church my parents go to, it's a I don't know what normal is, but in my world, it's a normal Christian church. It's nothing, it's not bad. It's not super awesome. It's just kind of there. But there are some people who have been there or been together for 2, 3, 4 decades. And there's a strength there. When people come in, I like it here, right? And obviously the presence of God is there and everything, right? And the word of God is preached. But there's this strength that community has because of that, and it's grown. And those who come in now are also strengthened by the strength of the others who are there, right? Just like it says here that you may have strength to comprehend with all the saints what is the breadth and length and height and depth, and to know the love of Messiah that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled with all the fullness of God. And I don't know about you, but I need the fullness of God in my life. And God says that by being planted somewhere, we're able to receive that fullness. All right. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for your goodness. Lord, we pray that, God, that we would be like those that have been planted by you. God, that Father, that we would recognize where you're leading us and where you've planted us, that God, that we would learn to live and to flourish in the places that you've put us. And God, I pray that Lord, that when it does come time to move on, whenever that may be, however long or short that our tenure is, Lord, help us to hear your voice clearly. And God, we as a people, we want to know your fullness. We want to understand your fullness. We want to experience it. We want to impart your fullness to those around us. Father, that's our cry this morning of our hearts, that God, that everything that you have, that we want it for us. And God, that includes to turn around and to give it away as well. But God, I pray this morning that you would come and show us where you're planting us, that you would help us to navigate the seasons of life, and Lord, trust that you have our best intentions at heart, and Lord God, that you would be honored and that you would be glorified. In Yeshua's name we pray. Amen. All right, so let's go ahead and stand. We'll give the blessing, and then we'll have a time of Q&A for the membership that we're doing, and we can take it from there, I suppose. All right. Yevarechecha Adonai vayishmerecha, Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'yuneka, Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord cause his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. Now may the Lord lift up his countenance on you and give you peace. Amen. All right. All right, so we're going to move into the time of Q&A. If you would like to stay for that and either hear what other people have to ask or have questions answered yourself, you're welcome to do that. Otherwise, you're also welcome to, otherwise you're dismissed. Let me say it that way. And you can